Night Radio Kalulu presents Just Another Look. Just Another Look is an innovative, exciting, albeit decidedly provocative and yes, certainly controversial, socio-political analysis of issues of a local, regional, and international nature. Just Another Look is heard only on Night Radio, first aired on Saturdays at 6 p.m. with repeat broadcasts on Sundays at 9 p.m. You can catch us on the World Wide Web, www.nightradio.info. We are also available on Facebook and YouTube. I am, of course, Keith Joseph. Today, dear friends, is Saturday. It is the 24th day of August, 2024. Welcome to another edition of your favorite program, Just Another Look. It's yet another week, and we can talk of yet another murder. So we seem to be on track to either equal or better the new national record established in 2023 for the number of murders in a single year. No one appears to be taking responsibility for a scientific approach to resolving crime in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Indeed, a truly pathetic situation. For many years, we've been talking about the high incidence of murders in this country. We've also been talking about the high incidence of crime generally in Vincentian society. And we are being given the impression time and again by those in authority and by those in authority over our security services that much is being done to arrest the situation so that Vincentian society would escape the vagaries of the likes of a Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica with regard to crime. But the more one examines the Vincentian reality, the more we understand the persistent failure on the part of the administration to adequately address the situation. We're not addressing the primary link between crime and the general malaise in behavior in our society. On the one hand, we encourage a behavioral change. We nurture, encourage a behavioral change that has left our society almost bereft of positive values. Students are threatening teachers. Students are threatening principals. Neighbor threatens and often engages in violence against one's neighbor. And the incidence of domestic violence continues unabated. So when we look at the conduct of the members of our society, from the highest level in governance in other areas of Vincentian life, we recognize how easy it is for the children, the younger generation, to adopt the attitudes that they have. Our children recognize how difficult it is to live in accordance with positive values in today's Vincentian society. Because increasingly they are witnessing the behavior of leadership in different institutions that suggest a total lack of values, lack of morality, lack of a sense of patriotism. You see, we confuse patriotism with people saying that they love the country. But you have witnessed as a society how selfish we have become. You've recognized that the concept that was once bolstered of labor love no longer exists except for those who support the Unity Labour Party. And even there's evidence of the crabs in a barrel syndrome, because once you recognize that the party thrives on largesse, on who can get what from whom, then there is as much a rat race within the Unity Labour Party, within government institutions. That is the example that we've set for the younger generation. And so they are socialized into that type of behavior, that type of social malaise, that type of dog-eat-dog. And it doesn't matter what I have to do to get ahead attitude. Our leaders are as culpable as anybody else for the systematic social degradation we have witnessed in Vincentian society. Virtually none of our social institutions are exempt. Virtually none of our social institutions are exempt. Everywhere, people are now prepared in St. Vincent and the Grenadines to do whatever it takes to get ahead. Because we continue to ignore and fail to discuss the Poverty Assessment Report of 2018, we have not been able to come to terms with the fact that indeed poverty has risen in this country. Indigence has increased. There is an increase in the number of people begging around this country. There seems to be an increase in prostitution in this country at several different levels. People are in survival mode. There continues to be an increase in predator larceny. There continues to be an increase in breaking into other people's homes. There is a general continuing increase in crime. We are aware that while the Unity Labour Party has boasted of a commitment to tourism, it has not shown that commitment in practice. And one wonders to what extent that has to do with the reality of the best options for the Grenadines, for St. Vincent and the Grenadines in terms of tourism, exist in the Grenadines. And the government is caught up in its own malaise of developing a product, a tourism product, that is largely Grenadines based, knowing that the people of the Grenadines do not support them politically. That is a conundrum for the ULP administration, has always been. And from the looks of it, will always be. Because despite all that is being said at a national level, the reality of the recovery efforts on the ground in the Grenadines are two distinctly different realities. And what is clear is that the people of the Grenadines have absolutely no confidence that whatever the ULP says it will do or can do to the Grenadines, they have no confidence that that will be in the best interest of the peoples of the Grenadines. If you look at the politics of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you'll realize that the politics has found its way in every aspect of life for the people in the Grenadines. They have to contend with the reality of people saying that they don't belong, that they are different, that they don't want to be part of us. And few take the time to ask whether any of that is true. But you hear Vincentians saying it almost all the time. Them down there, them over there. That's a cultural phenomenon that over the years we have not adequately addressed. One wonders whether had James Mitchell not become the Prime Minister of this country, whether we would ever have insisted upon being called St. Vincent and the Grenadines rather than mere St. Vincent. Because prior to James Mitchell's ascendancy to the Prime Ministership of this country, the majority of people were content with saying that they were from St. Vincent. And he insisted it is St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The reality is, dear friends, that as we now stand approaching the end of August to go into September, beginning of the school term, this country's crime situation is as dire as it has ever been. That is an unfortunate reality. And try as best they could, the security system has not been efficient. We maintain that had the shoe been on the other foot, had the shoe been on the other foot, had the ULP been in opposition, the government of the day would have been harangued over and over and over again to show their ineptitude in terms of addressing crime. And we know that because in the past we were told of the crime situation. In its manifesto of 1994, the Movement for National Unity, Labour MNU Unity Party, in its section on page 7, Law and Order, promised a safer, less violent society with less illegal drugs. 1994. 30 years ago. 30 years ago. And for the last 23 of those 30 years, the same people who were authors of the Manifesto for Labour MNU Unity in 1994 have been unable to meet their own promises. But when you read their weekly input in the newspapers, when you listen to them on the political platforms, they don't go this far back. Except they want to be critical of the opposition New Democratic Party. But in 1994, they promised, or they indicated, that St. Vincent and the Grenadines has become a very violent criminal society under the NDP administration. In addition, there has been a dramatic use or increase in the use and abuse of illegal drugs, marijuana, cocaine, and crack. The restoration of safety, peace, tranquility, respect for law and order, and the building of a drug-free society require social, economic, religious, and education efforts. Measures relating to the police, defense, and security, the judicial system, the reform of laws, and the penal system have to be implemented. Well, they have had 23 years of trying to make this country safer, to make this country more peaceful, to build a tranquil society, one where there is respect for law and order, and to create a drug-free society. Now, those in authority, those responsible for the nation's security, cannot determine whether or not we have gangs in operation in the country. They can't decide that. Simple thing. Because, as we learned from the indigenous peoples, they speak with forked tongue. So they can't seem to agree even among themselves as leaders of the security system for our country, whether or not we have gangs. Because they're looking for a cause for the continued, uncontrolled murder rate in the country. And so they're fishing for answers. There's no scientific inquiry being undertaken. They are fishing for answers. And since nobody wants to take responsibility and consequently resign for not doing the job, they are playing games of chance in terms of identifying cause. Remember, at a discussion at the highest level of CARICOM, one prime minister who shall remain nameless talk about high-priced women, high-priced women wanting to pursue a certain lifestyle is a partial cause for the criminality in the Caribbean. They get their men to commit crimes to satisfy their high flying lifestyle. When you see a leader of a country can offer that at the highest level of government's meeting in the region, at CARICOM, heads of government, you could understand how far off base we have become as a region. That becomes an acceptable thing, and to boast that every one of you know that this is the absolute truth. The rest of CARICOM have to be mimics. That they all sat there and accepted that as something that sounded reasonable. Reasonable. Then you understand where the Caribbean has reached in terms of its descent into a malaise. You sit back and you try to think of the scholarly presentations of prime ministers in the past, and how far removed they were from the nonsense that we get being projected by today's prime ministers as acceptable explanations for what has become of their respective societies. Even in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, there was no major rebuff of such an explanation for crime and criminal behavior in this country. At a time when people are talking about gender equity, after having for years promoted the advancement of women, we now blame women. We blame women for the criminal activities of men in our society. So our men have become so weak, and the women have become so strong, that the women are to be blamed for men committing crimes. You see, one of the things that is lacking in our society is proper discourse. And people offer top-of-head explanations, in the heat of the moment explanations, rather than engage in any systematic critical analysis of what obtains in our respective societies. So the fact that the entire Caribbean leadership, politically, can sit in one room and accept that kind of explanation from one of their peers is the best example of what this region has become. Where is leadership? Where is leadership? And it's the same thing that happens in the parliaments. It is amazing what power can do. And look at our leaders and see how much they stand in contrast to Nelson Mandela, a freedom fighter, spending decades in prison, eventually being freed. and formed a government and provided a leadership style while in government that genuinely sought to heal a nation. He was the victim. Years on the receiving end of government's worst behavior in apartheid. He suffered the ignominy of being in jail for decades, and yet he emerged with a forgiving spirit. He didn't have time to be reminding the nation of where they had come from. What he suggested was that we now have an opportunity to facilitate change. When others were thinking that he would seize the opportunity to get back at those who held them under apartheid for all these years, he exhibited the best values. He showed that forgiving spirit. Stand up when you need to, but never dispose of your fundamental values. Just like Bishop Tutu did. But those are not examples that our Caribbean leaders espouse. They have shown a commitment to vindictiveness, to getting back at you. After all these years and decades of apartheid, Nelson Mandela established a truth commission because he felt what was fundamental was to get at the truth, because only through coming face to face with truth could you have any genuine catharsis. You can't move forward if you have not come to terms with the truth. But our leaders don't want truth. The first thing we sought to do, one of the first things, was to have a commission of inquiry into the Utley Hall Marina and Shipyard, because perhaps we felt that that would have revealed support for what we had in the manifestos of the Labour Unity Coalition and then Unity Labour Party about the former government. Get at them! Expose them! But while you're seeking to do that with an Utley Hall inquiry that had to be stopped because of its clear prejudice, we were bypassing the tenders board because we needed to get something done in a hurry. Expediency. We didn't recognize that that act of bypassing the tenders board with regard to the bridge over troubled water was as much going against the grain as what you were accusing the previous government of doing with the Utley Hall Shipyard and Marina, which you are yet to prove wrongdoing. So what is the example that we have given to our young people? Go after them. Go after them. And so we have sat down and accepted that sort of leadership example. while talking about an education revolution. So while we are having an education revolution, it seems that that revolution is in part responsible for the increasing crime rate, the increasing murder rate, the increasing social malaise in which we find ourselves. We're not prepared to say that. We're not prepared to accept that. We talk a whole lot about the successes every time exams are done at a regional level. We say nothing about those who have fallen through the cracks, those who we label failures in the system, and we leave them to run riot on the streets of the country. It's easy to talk political nonsense on a platform, particularly at election time. What is far more difficult is to do something about the social malaise that we have spawned in our respective societies. Throughout every manifesto, since the Movement for National Unity and Labour Alliance, every manifesto has sought to take you back to a period before they came into existence. They fail to compare themselves with their own 5-year terms. Because you see, to do that would be to have to find an explanation as to why crime continues to rise. And you don't want to stand on a platform in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and point an accusing finger at what you call high-valued women, encouraging men to commit crime. You don't want to do that in St. Vincent and the Grenadines on an election platform. And you don't want to put it in a manifesto under your watch. So our crime situation has to be seen as part and parcel of our boast of an education revolution. We have apparently better educated the criminals in our society. And you see, we have a leadership that thrives on being in the media, and that apparently thrives on seeking to exercise control of the media insofar as its messaging. If you're in the media all the time, you feel that you can actually control the messaging. And you watch how our media ends up being so heavily manipulated. And they recognize that there's a certain lethargy within the media in respect of appropriate research and analysis. So we watched that ever since the Unity Labour Party came to power, ever since Gonzalez has been Prime Minister, you must ask yourself whether there has been a deliberate attempt on his part to control the narrative of this country. And Howie Prince was over at Nemo. Potential disaster pending, whether it is a tropical storm or hurricane. He found himself there as commander-in-chief, but behaved more like communicator-in-chief. And you weren't sure who was the expert on the preparation exercise, him or Howie. That's the same situation when we had Soufriere eruption a few years ago. Caught literally in a bind where Soufriere's, the seriousness of Soufriere and the fact that others saw the danger and sent it viral before the government did. It was those people who were in Soufriere early in the morning in December who forced that press conference. They're sending information viral on Soufriere virtually boiling. That forced the press conference. Not the fact that for several months before, we were getting information at a governmental level about the rumblings of Soufriere. So once the press conference came, the Prime Minister, rather than the journalist, took charge of the press conference. He was asking Richie more questions than the journalist. And you wondered why. And you wondered whether it was because there was evidence that information had been communicated with the government about the shenanigans of Soufriere that were taking place months before. Whether we wanted to manage that information, massage it so that the fingers do not end up pointing as they ought to have at the government, but not making the country sufficiently aware at the time. You could always turn around and say, that they didn't want to create panic. They didn't want to create panic. But that is how we are. Master communicator takes charge, and the same thing happened with our most recent Hurricane Beryl. And the same thing is happening. He wants to control the narrative as to how we are responding after Beryl. And it's not surprising that you end up with a namby-pamby discourse where on the 23rd of August edition of Eyewitness News, the ULP contribution prides itself. The headline, huge progress on relief, recovery, and reconstruction. So, you're trying to take charge once more to control the narrative that from your vantage point, you have seen huge progress on relief, recovery, and reconstruction. That's not what the nation is seeing. That is not what the nation knows. But if you try to control the narrative, you're talking about laser focus. The laser focus of the the laser focus of the Unity Labour Party government at this time is to deliver optimally in all practical circumstances on its three conjoined processes of relief, recovery, and reconstruction. The 3 R's. Alliteration, Papa. Alliteration. This epitomizes the distractive politics that the ULP has been using ever since it came to office in 2001. seeking to control the narrative. But ask the people who feel it. Ask the people who are yet to be approached about their status subsequent to the passage of Hurricane Beryl. Ask the people who are non-supporters of the ruling regime how they have been treated. Ask the people of the Grenadines how they have been treated. They started their response to the disaster, the government did, without consulting the Grenadines. It's the people in the media, the people who used the call-in program to let the nation know that nobody came to talk to them at it. That is what forced the so-called consultation. And the consultation was an embarrassment for government. But what happened? Papa deflected everything. Somebody makes an accusation and tell the head of NEMO, you answer that. You hear what they say? You answer that. What kind of leadership is that? What kind of leadership is that that exposes people that way? The analysis? It may well be that the Prime Minister knew how far behind the 8 ball they were in terms of responding to the disaster. Having already been criticized, and his government being criticized by those who were most damaged, he brought those who are supposed to be responsible and let them loose. Let them face and respond to whatever people say. That is leadership. That is leadership. You are responsible for national security in this country. You don't dare do that. You don't dare do that as Minister of National Security. Because it's you the fingers will be pointing at. You are the head of government. And one wonders what those people responsible for NEMO and those others in authority position that he brought and exposed at a so-called consultation, what they thought of that exercise. What they thought about being virtually thrown to the wolves. What they thought about that. You see, it is a question of the way in which we do things. What is the long-term objective? Is it for the Prime Minister to always be seen in a particular light, regardless of who gets thrown under the bus? Is it a recognition that at the end of the day, everybody else in authority is dispensable, except yourself? Everybody else is susceptible to blame, except yourself. Because you do nothing wrong, you know everything, you don't lie, etc., etc., etc. The long list that you normally give to people. That is our reality. And that is what is disconcerting. Because at the end of the day, it is as if the Prime Minister wants to emerge clean as a whistle, as the old people say, and everybody else to carry the blame. It doesn't matter who is really responsible. Apparently, as long as we can find somebody else to carry the blame. So when we look at the nonsense. We are attempting to cover our tracks. So the article for this week says, and we quote, only the eyes of the politically jaundiced, the unreasonable, or the disinterested are not seeing the remarkable process being made on all relevant fronts since the damage, destruction, and devastation, alliteration galore, wrought by Hurricane Beryl on July 1st, a mere 7 weeks ago. This is a government trying to suggest it is fast-tracking the recovery effort, when this same government, which had initially committed to the Thomas Saunders Secondary School being the first to occupy one of those plywood institutions in Annesville because of how bad its infrastructure was in Richmond Hill, did not get to be the first. High school and grammar school ended up out there before Thomas Saunders. Grammar school was such a hurry job, and taken back to their old institution within 1 year, while that institution had not been completely repaired, and there are parts of it that are still in need of repair that were supposed to have been committed to repairs when they went out to Annesville in the first instance. So what you come now and telling us about remarkable progress? What are you telling us about that? The high school has been out there for 3 years already. 3 years. Where is the fast tracking? Where is the fast tracking? Where is the remarkable progress on the repairs of the girls' high school? 3 years. 3 years. The Thomas Saunders Secondary School has already been out there for 2 years, and work has not started on the institution at Richmond Hill, their original home. Work has not yet started on that. So much so that the hogglum tree that should have been removed years ago fell long in the yard. And it's still where it fell. Nobody cut it up yet. That's how much the Thomas Saunders original school had not received the attention of the administration. But now you're trying to make us feel that somehow you're fast-tracking something. Remarkable progress being made on the relevant fronts. What are the relevant fronts? What are the relevant fronts? You see, when you're marketing yourself, you could say anything and get away with it, because you're in charge. And you can tell everybody everything that you were doing. You're doing remarkable progress on trying to find a killer for Glenn Jackson. So much progress that we bring the wrong man in court. The wrong man was arrested and charged. The wrong man! And you had to release him. So your key spokesperson for your first 2 terms in office, murdered, left ashamedly naked in the back of a car, and you couldn't find a killer. Up to today, you can't find a killer. And up to this year, you seem to have forgotten the date of the anniversary of his murder. If some people in the media don't remind you, you don't remember. If you do that to your own, what would you do to others? So the students of the Thomas Saunders Secondary School are still out in the Hudson at Annersville. Yeah? You see, because every time you seem to, as an administration, every time you seem to be doing things, you seem to cover up the fact that at best your approach to governance is adhocracy after the fact, which is tantamount to saying you react to realities. As a former progressive, you wouldn't like to be termed reactionary, but that is what the evidence shows. A reactionary government, not a proactive one. And that's why you're always seeking to offer explanations. Like the one we are now getting about Vybz Kartel. But that whole Vybz Kartel thing is consistent with the ULP seeking to control the narrative. Everybody talking about it. It gives the Prime Minister an opportunity for him to explain yet again. Master communicator. He could explain everything. He hasn't been able to explain the fact that the Privy Council, in record time, was able to rule in favor of James Mitchell when he sought to have his name cleared from the interim report of the Commission of Inquiry into the Otley Hall Marina and Shipyard. Couldn't explain that. Because at the highest court for this country, what James Mitchell was trying to have done across the Eastern Caribbean, across our judicial system, got done in record time. What does that tell you about our jurisprudence? What does that tell you about our jurisprudence? There was a time when the MNU and ULP were in opposition that they chastised then leaders for having too great an influence on who are appointing judges in the region, in the sub-region. Has anything changed? You see, when you are in opposition, sometimes you see things in a particular light. Or when you get the opportunity to rule, to govern, you tend not to remember your own historical antecedents. You tend to ignore the fact that you need to keep ever before you all the mumbo jumbo that you put in manifestos that sounded nice and looked good because you wanted to get the opportunity to govern. And so you could always find an explanation as to why you haven't done certain things. One of the early questions in 2001, asked by a journalist then, Dougie Knows Joseph, in a press conference with the Prime Minister, Ralph Gonsalves, was on that same trade union question about whether public servants will be allowed to contest elections. And the response was that that matter, while having been placed in the Constitution, while having been a talking point on the political platforms of the ULP during the election campaign for 2001, is on the agenda, but it has not yet reached the top tier of the legislative agenda. That was the response. When 3 public servants contested for the NDP on their understanding that the agreement between government and the trade union had finally accepted that public servants would not be punished if they contested elections. It took several more years before that was acknowledged as having been written and acceptable within the Constitution. Prime Minister's first response, the fellas were not re-employed, was that the agreement, that clause in the agreement was an aspiration. An aspiration! He must have been the only one that read it as an aspiration. Politicians play these games all of the time. And it is unfortunate that their followers, rather than engage in objective analysis, engage themselves instead in paying homage to them. How they trick them. How they're good politicians. Because they've been able to say this here and not do it there. You admire them for that. You admire them for that. You see, the issue of the Vybz Kartel is to facilitate national discussion, a major distraction from the reality of what is happening in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We were told that they will do over the poverty assessment report, 2018. This is 6 years later. This is 6 years later. You haven't heard anything about it, and they hope that we will stop talking about it. But as long as they continue not to reveal that document to the public, two things will happen. The public will continue to accept the leaked information as truth. And secondly, the situation, the reality will get worse. It will get worse. So we are not sure if we're waiting on the official document to be circulated, which we are told will not be circulated, because the exercise will have to be redone, because suddenly they have gotten dissatisfied with the way in which it was conducted. That come like Trump. If you don't like how it was conducted, it's not truth. Because you are at the controls. You are at the controls. So when he keep denying the reality of climate change, because it wasn't consistent with his perception of truth, he kept vacillating about COVID again, because it wasn't his version of truth. We get that here all the time. Indeed, it is amazing if you take the time to apply your critical thinking skills of the similarities between Gonzalez and Trump. Amazing similarities. Amazing similarities. Because you can always tell yourself that your truth, what you believe and what you profess, is the only truth that should be told and found acceptable. Everybody else's truth, there's something wrong with it. So just in case you were planning to criticize the administration for their perceived tardiness and incompleteness in terms of how they approach the response to the consequences for many Vincentians of the passage of Hurricane Beryl. They put you in a category. Only the eyes of the political jaundiced, the unreasonable, or the disinterested are not seeing the remarkable progress. So you're politically jaundiced if you're not seeing it. You're unreasonable if you're not agreeing with it. And you're disinterested generally if otherwise. So they've already categorized you. They've already categorized you. So that takes care, as far as their supporters are concerned, any sort of criticism level. But many of your supporters have also been affected in St. Vincent. So what is the response rate to redressing their plights versus the response rate to the people in the Grenadines? Are we seeing an attempt to reconstruct the Southern Grenadines by the ruling Unity Labour Party? Are we seeing it as an opportunity now for all those that perhaps may have been squatting in certain areas for us to finally get rid of them? How really are we treating the people of the Grenadines? How disposed are we really to engaging in a consultative process to facilitate not just a rapid fire reconstruction rehabilitation process, but one that is systematically inclusive and that takes into consideration the history of the peoples of the Grenadines and their relationship to the land. To the realities, historical realities that they have experienced in the last 20 years in particular. How much of that is being taken into consideration? Who have you really been talking to? And at the various call-in programs not revealed that there was little by way of consultation, would we ever have had the meeting or the so-called consultation? You see, we're good at putting figures. We're good at putting figures. What we are not good at is always telling the truth. And over the years, Vincentians have become highly circumspect of government's relationship with truth. So we can put up data, you know. And as we have said on this program on several occasions, we have to question whether or not we have become proficient at reading and understanding the text, how to lie with statistics. You see, we can't statistically cover up crime anymore. Because we have so many social media entities in St. Vincent and the Grenadines today that as soon as something happens, it's on the media. You don't have a choice. You get pictures right away. Everybody has a cell phone. So the crime is making its way virally even before sometimes the police get on the scene. Can't escape. You don't need to wait on your statistics anymore. Everybody is keeping tabs on the statistics. Back these days, They're keeping tabs on any violence that takes place anyhow, anywhere. The police are yet to play catch up because social media already ahead of them. So while some may have an interest in focusing their attention on Vybz Kartel being in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and offering the Prime Minister an opportunity to have a discussion on that, waste of time. Waste of time. That only highlights the distractive politics that has become commonplace for the Unity Labour Party. Far more important to us is the livelihood of those people who have lost everything as a result of the passage of Hurricane Beryl. That is what our attention is. The extent to which the people of the Grenadines themselves say they're getting food, they have clothes, what they don't have is shelter. And don't tell me that we can't put temporary shelters in place to allow for people to stay in the Grenadines, to school in the Grenadines. Why do we suddenly have to move them all? We've made mention already of the facilities we saw the United Nations put in place on the tarmac when they were dealing with the aftermath of Soufrière's eruption in 2021 into 2022. We can do it if we are committed to doing it. And you cannot blame the people of the Southern Grenadines for believing that there may well be ulterior motives in the courses of action being pursued by the ruling regime in terms of the recovery process. It is good for us to hear that you now want to make a better facility of what used to be the Teachers College. But in the process, you have not responded to concerns expressed by the people of this country as to what happened with the relationship of that we had with the people who once occupied that building, the people with the offshore medical school. What happened to them? Where they gone? When did you know they were going? Because you remember, when Seth Mackie was Minister of Health, he boasted of the number of institutions offshore medical schools that wanted to come to St. Vincent and the Grenadines because we have one of the best hospitals for them to do practicals. Many of us didn't believe that had any truth in it, but that's what he said. And there was nobody in government that contradicted him. But we're not being told when those who come choose to leave. We are told when they come. We are told that it will benefit our country. But we're not told of the consequences for this country's economy and this country's image in the global community when they up and leave as they just did. But you change the focus, you change the narrative, you control it again. Let us talk about what we can do with that institution now to facilitate your ambitious plan for the people of the Southern Grenadines. You see, there seems no real commitment on the part of the ULP administration to establishing a consultative democracy of any sort. Throughout his leadership as Prime Minister of this country, at best we have seen time and time and time again a commitment to political expediency. What will bolster his politics? What will bolster his political image appears to be primordial over and over and over again. But history does not always record how you see things. They record how things impact the societies in which we live. So while you may write your own history and put them in books, they could stay on the shelves because they are not sufficiently important for institutions, academic institutions, to see in them content that will somehow facilitate an understanding and appreciation of truth. Objective truth. Not personal truth, objective truth. So we are at a state in St. Vincent and the Grenadines where the nation is caught up in political campaigning. In fact, it's been in that way for a while. Political campaigns have started more than a year ago. And when we come to that, what some people call the silly season, it's called the silly season because you could get anything, you could say anything, you could almost do anything, and we are filled with promises. Very little time is taken to reflect on unfulfilled promises, because it is the silly season. The ruling regime had been in election mode for several months. And the passage and consequences of the passage of Hurricane Beryl may well be seen as an opportunity, yet again, by the ruling ULP to benefit from political largesse. Because you have a legitimate cause, you asking people for assistance for rehabilitation, you're getting more money, you're getting more materials. And since you are the one receiving it and you are the one distributing it, and you are the one using it for the most part, it gives you an opportunity, a distinct advantage over the opposition, because you have the capacity to offer people things. And we've seen that several times in the past. And we are likely to see it again, because there has been a pattern. And the Unity Labour Party has perhaps been the most beneficial of this since coming into office. The nation's political history. There have been more disasters or near disasters in the last 23 years than there have been in such a similar period in history. And each time, the largesse has been used for political mileage. This time is no different. What is different is the pervasive nature of social media. So everything that is done is seen. Everything that is done goes viral. And that is why it is so important to control the narrative. And that is why we see the nonsense written about 3 R's: relief, recovery, and reconstruction. But you know, friends, I want briefly to address the issue of labor. Because the Unity Labour Party, even when it was MNU Labour, talked about labor and pride themselves on a labor administration, on being pro-labor. But if we look at the manifestos that we've been discussing over the past several weeks, they talk about how much they're committed to being a labor government. So they said that they will follow the recommendations of the World Bank. We said that in 1994. They will control deforestation. They will control biocide use. They will better solid waste management, better liquid waste management. They will strengthen environmental policies. They'll prevent further coastal erosion. Yeah? But they had precious little to say. Sorry, they said in the field of trade unionism, labor and production, a labor MNU government will engender new and more productive attitudes to work. They will review and reform labor and trade union legislation. But you know about that. You know that in truth and in fact, the only real trade unions you hear about is the public service unions, the teachers union and the public service union. The others, generally people believe, have become the playthings of the ruling regime. Were it not for the public service union and the teachers union, for all intents and purposes, trade unionism in St. Vincent and the Grenadines would have been dead. Would have been dead. Because the others seem to believe that by playing political patsy with the government, they will always be beneficiaries. But we have not seen any reform in trade union legislation. None. In 2001, 98, Labour, they will immediately reform and revamp the National Wages Council with a mandate to investigate wages in given areas of employment, etc., etc. They'll immediately take steps to introduce a new labor code. We shall be a labor government. In short, the ULP promises a new deal for workers of this country and will give meaning to the word labor in the name. Well, after 23 years in office, they can't even have a full program for Labor Day. Labor Day in this country is just another holiday. There has been nothing done by the Unity Labour Party, and we can say this without fear of contradiction, to observe and celebrate Labor Day. You know, not long after taking office, they had some students from the St. Vincent Grammar School join them on the streets to try to celebrate Labor Day. Because they knew that they couldn't get the workers to do so. Since that, they seem to have abandoned the idea that you really don't have any celebration of workers and their rights in this country. In 2001, the manifesto says that a government, ULP government, will review in conjunction with civic society, particularly the trade unions and private sector organizations, all existing labor legislation, including the Protection of Employment Act of 1980, health and safety laws at the workplace, blah, blah, blah. They will encourage the setting up of a profit sharing and share ownership schemes when necessary and desirable for workers' benefit. You know, it's always useful to keep these manifestos because it reminds you of the trickery that political parties engage in, more particularly every 5 years. Every time elections come around, they go through all sorts of lengths to produce a new set of promises or warm the over promises of the past, knowing that they have not fulfilled them at all. The pathway to governance is unfortunately filled with lies and empty promises. And many of them abandon the manifestos. They never look at them again once they get to govern. You could always, 5 years later, prepare something else, man. Don't worry, nobody paying attention to that because they assume that they don't read them. Largely because the manifestos are made public so close to the election that they have absolutely no impact on people's voting patterns. They put the things in there, but they don't discuss it with the people. So by and large, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, manifestos are just tradition. They're not seen as impacting voting patterns. Because if they were, they would not emerge so close to the election. But it's because we believe that our people are fickle. That our people can be treated with a level of disrespect that suggests they don't read anyway and they don't apply their critical thinking skills. All we need is to put some colorful, fancy document in front of them and hope that the colors and so on and the fact that something came out would be enough to get them to vote in a particular way. It is gross disrespect for the electorate. But we get it repeatedly because there is this fundamental belief that we can fool all of the people all of the time. And all political parties engage in that behavior. And it is interesting because when they come to discuss the issue of candidates, it's a mumbo-jumbo type of game that they play. And at the end of the day, it is left to the leader to say, this is what I want. Political parties do not operate on meritocratic principles. Those who have been in politics for a long time will continue to tell you that they learn on the job and they have more experience And they should therefore abrogate to themselves the right to determine who should be a candidate, who they like, who the party leader wants and anoints. So we fool the delegates in different constituencies into believing that they are somehow involved in a consultative process to determine who shall best represent them. But there's a lot of dishonesty that takes place. A lot of dishonesty in terms of fooling the electorate into believing that they are choosing the candidates. When in truth and in fact, more often than not, it is the leader that determines the candidate he or she wants. The system of selecting candidates in politics in this country, as in most Caribbean countries, is fraught with dishonesty. Fraught with dishonesty. And we play on people's emotions. It's not a meritocracy. And so we cannot expect governance of the country to be based on meritocracies. It goes against the grain of our political traditions, our political culture, to allow meritocracy to invade the politics of the day. It is the reason why, as an academic, people talk about the importance of the shift from charismatic leadership. We abandon traditional leadership. We abandon charismatic leadership, and we talk about rational legal leadership, as Max Weber and others talked about in bureaucracy. But that is not true. Not in the Caribbean. In the Caribbean, we still have traditional leadership, particularly in the private sector. Old money linking with new money, but holding on to old principles. Many of our leaders believe that it is their charisma more than anything else that allows them to be successful. And so they play upon people's emotions. They play upon the emotions of the electorate. And even as they boast of education revolutions, they know that passing a few days before and dropping money on the doors will help sway votes. So where is the rational legal leadership that is supposed to be consistent with modern society? Perhaps that is why some are so anxious to talk about postmodern society. An academic concept that sounds good but means nothing. Vincentian society is at the crossroads. There is much that needs to be done. Let us not be distracted by the attempts of those who lead us. The issue of Vybz Kartel is of little significance to the development of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Take it for what it is, a continuation of the destructive politics of Gonzales and his Unity Labour Party. There's no need to have an explanation for why he did it, or to get into should he or should he not have done it. That is insignificant to where we go as a nation. Stay focused on issues that matter. We have a significant proportion of our nation in the southern Grenadines that are in need. More than anything else, they need shelter. Why can't we empower them to do the things that are necessary for them to sustain life? Let us not be so anxious to uproot them and to change their culture. Let us rather facilitate their empowerment by making them more responsible for the reconstruction process, for the recovery process, that they may, in their own best interests and in the best interests of the country, allow those two interests to be combined to facilitate a new approach to their integration in the national economy and the national development program. Why don't we seek to do that? Why don't we treat them as fellow Vincentians rather than them out there or them down there? Why don't we find ways of bringing our different social organizations together with our economic organizations in order to facilitate a new beginning in many respects for Vincentian society as a result of the passage of Hurricane Beryl? Let us see it as an opportunity for cleansing our old way of thinking, our old way of doing things, and building a new St. Vincent and the Grenadines. As a society, we need all hands on deck to facilitate change. We cannot address the crime situation if we leave it only to the security forces, the Ministry of National Security. They have shown their incompetence. They have shown their inability to address it from the leadership level. We continue to say in any other society, the Minister of National Security would have been asked to resign as a result of incompetence. Here, there's little chance of that, because he's explained everything to death. But we are seeing continuing deaths. And that does not hold well for the future of our society. Resolve, people. Resolve that we can do better. Resolve that as a nation we can in fact pull ourselves out of this unholy mess in which we find ourselves. Enough said. You've been listening to another edition of Nice Radio's Callaloo presentation, Just Another Look. Just Another Look is an innovative, exciting, albeit decidedly provocative and yes, certainly controversial socio-political analysis of issues of a local, regional, and international nature. Just Another Look is heard only on Nice Radio, first aired at 6 p.m. on Saturdays, repeated on Sundays at 9 p.m. Catch us on the World Wide Web, www.niceradio.info, but also find us on Facebook and YouTube. I am, of course, Keith Joseph.